Dr. Marcus Thompson stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with careful precision. The reflection staring back at him was one of determination mixed with an underlying tension. Today was an important day, a faculty meeting where he would present his latest research on educational equity. It was a topic he had devoted his career to, a cause that resonated deeply within him. Yet the weight of expectations felt almost suffocating. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. As he gathered his notes, Marcus couldn't shake off the memories of the subtle, yet persistent, racial biases that had shadowed his academic journey. He recalled the dismissive glances from colleagues during previous meetings, the unspoken skepticism that had lingered in the air whenever he shared his findings. Despite his groundbreaking research and the accolades he had received, there was always a question of whether he truly belonged in the hallowed halls of academia. "Marcus, you ready?" called his colleague, Dr. Emily Chun, from the hallway. Her voice broke through his reverie, bringing him back to the present. "Almost there, just going over my notes," he replied, forcing a smile as he stepped out of his office. Emily had always been supportive, a rare ally in a department that often felt like a battleground. "Don't worry too much," she said, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. "Your research is solid. They can't ignore that forever." Marcus nodded, though doubts still gnawed at him. "Thanks, Emily. I just wish the committee would see it for what it is." As they walked down the corridor, the walls adorned with framed degrees and photographs of past faculty members, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. The meeting room loomed ahead, and he could already hear the faint murmur of voices inside. When they entered, Marcus was greeted by a sea of familiar faces, some warm and welcoming, others cold and indifferent. He took his seat, feeling the weight of scrutiny pressing down on him. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a senior faculty member known for her sharp tongue and sharper opinions, sat at the head of the table. She shot him a fleeting glance that felt more like an appraisal than a greeting. "Let's get started," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Today, we'll hear from Dr. Thompson regarding his findings on educational disparities." Marcus straightened up, readying himself for the presentation. He glanced at the slides on his laptop, his heart pounding in rhythm with the ticking clock on the wall. As he began to speak, laying out the data and the implications of his research, he could see the faces of his colleagues shift from mild interest to barely concealed skepticism. While Dr. Thompson's work is undoubtedly thorough, Dr. Jenkins interjected, her tone dripping with condescension. "I wonder if the conclusions drawn are overly simplistic. After all, educational equity is a multifaceted issue." Marcus clenched his jaw but maintained his composure. "I appreciate your perspective, Dr. Jenkins, but my research highlights the systemic barriers that students of color face. Ignoring these factors only perpetuates the cycle of inequality." "Systemic barriers, yes," she replied, her smile patronizing. "But one must also consider personal responsibility. Not every issue can be attributed to external forces." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Marcus felt a flush of anger rising within him, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. "I believe the data speaks for itself. It's not just about individual choices. It's about creating an environment where all students have the opportunity to succeed." As the discussion continued, Marcus sensed the dismissive attitudes of his colleagues weighing heavily on him. He could see them whispering among themselves, their body language closing off any chance of genuine engagement with his work. His heart sank as he realized that, despite his efforts, he was still viewed through a lens tainted by prejudice. After the meeting, he stepped out into the hallway, the air feeling stifling. He needed to talk to someone who understood the struggle. That's when he spotted Jamal, his best friend since graduate school, leaning against the wall, arms crossed with a concerned expression. "Hey, man, how did it go?" Jamal asked, his voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos in Marcus's mind. "It was frustrating," Marcus admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I feel like they're not even trying to understand the importance of my research." Jamal nodded, his expression sympathetic. "You know how they are, but don't let them get to you. Your work matters. Just keep pushing forward." Marcus sighed, feeling a mix of determination and despair. "It's hard, Jamal. I'm tired of having to prove myself over and over again. It's like no matter what I achieve, it's never enough. Just remember why you started this journey in the first place, Jamal said, placing a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. You're here to make a difference. Focus on that. With those words, Marcus felt a flicker of hope reignite within him. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was determined to continue fighting for justice in academia, no matter the obstacles he faced. Dr. Marcus Thompson sat at his cluttered desk, the morning sun filtering through the blinds of his small office. The notification from the university about the prestigious academic award had ignited a spark within him, one he thought had dimmed under the weight of countless subtle prejudices. He leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment to savor the recognition of his work on educational disparities. The email had read like a lifeline amidst the storm of indifference he faced from his colleagues. Marcus, are you okay? Jamal's voice broke through his reverie as he stepped into the room, a warm smile on his face. Marcus glanced up, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Yeah, I just received some news, he replied, his voice tinged with excitement. I've been nominated for the National Education Research Award. Jamal's eyes widened. That's amazing, man. You deserve it. Your research is groundbreaking. Marcus nodded, a smile creeping onto his face. It feels good to know that someone out there sees the value in what I'm doing. But it also makes me think about how often I've been overlooked here. The committee positions I applied for, candidates with less impactful work getting ahead. Jamal's expression shifted, concern etched on his face. You know how it is? Sometimes it's not about the work, but who you know. Just focus on your submission. This award could change everything for you. With newfound determination, Marcus turned back to his work. He pored over his research, meticulously preparing his submission, yet a nagging sensation of unease settled in his stomach. Despite his accomplishments, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still fighting against an unseen current. Later that week, he found himself in the faculty lounge, a place that often felt more like a battlefield than a haven for intellectual discourse. The clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation surrounded him, but Marcus was only half listening. His mind wandered back to the recent committee meeting, where dismissive glances and condescending remarks had greeted his presentation like a familiar but unwelcome guest. As he sipped his coffee, he overheard a conversation at the next table that sent a chill down his spine. Did you see the nominations for the selection committee? A woman's voice chimed in. I can't believe Marcus thinks he has a shot. There are other candidates who are way more qualified. Right? Another voice agreed. It's almost laughable. His research is interesting, but it doesn't have the same impact as others. I just don't see how they could consider him. Marcus felt a tightening in his chest, his heart racing as he processed their words. The casual nature of their dismissal stung more than he anticipated. He exchanged a glance with Jamal, who was seated a few tables away and had caught the same conversation. Did you hear that? Marcus muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. They're not even trying to hide it. Jamal looked across the room, his brow furrowing. They're just afraid of what you represent, Marcus. You challenge the status quo, and that makes them uncomfortable. And what do I do about it? Marcus asked, frustration seeping into his voice. I can't just sit back and let this happen. But I also can't risk my position here. What if I'm labeled as the angry black professor? What if they use it against me? Jamal leaned forward, his eyes earnest. You have to stand up for yourself, man. If you don't, nothing will change. Let them know you're here, and you're not backing down. The urgency in Jamal's voice resonated with Marcus. He took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anger and resolve. He had worked too hard to let this moment slip away. The award nomination was not just a recognition of his work. It was a chance to confront the very biases that sought to silence him. As the lunch crowd began to shift, Marcus made a silent vow to himself. He would not let fear dictate his actions any longer. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but he was ready to confront them head-on, fueled by the truth of his research and the conviction that change was not only possible, but necessary. Dr. Marcus Thompson sat at his desk, staring at the scattered papers before him, each one filled with notes, ideas, and the weight of his intentions. He had made the decision to conduct a workshop on racial bias in academia, a move that felt both empowering and daunting. The prospect of creating a dialogue about the challenges he faced ignited a fire in him, but the fear of backlash loomed over his thoughts like a dark cloud. He picked up his phone and texted Jamal, Asterisk, I'm thinking of doing that workshop. Need to talk. Asterisk, Jamal's reply was almost instantaneous. Asterisk, let's meet up. I'm all in. Asterisk, later that afternoon, they met at a local cafe. The familiar scent of coffee mingling with the chatter of students and faculty. Marcus took a deep breath as he sat across from Jamal, the comfort of their friendship providing a refuge from the tension he felt. I think it's time, Marcus began, his voice steady but low. I want to address the biases we all know exist in our department. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who feels marginalized. Jamal nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. I get that, man. But you know they'll push back. You're walking into a minefield. Exactly, Marcus replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. But if I don't say something, who will? We can't keep pretending that everything is fine. Jamal leaned forward, his eyes serious. You have to prepare for the fallout. Not everyone will be on your side. Believe me, I know, Marcus said, his voice tinged with determination. But if I can at least get a few people to listen, it'll be worth it. As the workshop date approached, Marcus felt a mix of urgency and anxiety. He crafted an agenda, detailing the topics he wanted to cover: microaggressions, systemic bias, and the importance of allyship. He wanted to create a safe space, a platform for voices that often went unheard. But as he distributed the invitations, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to step into uncharted territory. On the day of the workshop, Marcus arrived early, setting up the room with care. He arranged chairs in a circle, hoping to foster an environment of openness. As faculty members trickled in, he greeted them with a smile, though he noted the expressions of some, curiosity mixed with skepticism. Thank you all for coming, Marcus began once everyone settled. I appreciate your willingness to engage in this important conversation. Today, we're here to talk about racial bias and how it affects our academic community. A few heads nodded, but others, including Dr. Jenkins, wore frowns that suggested discomfort. Marcus continued, sharing personal anecdotes and statistics that highlighted the disparities present in academia. The atmosphere shifted, tension giving way to a hesitant dialogue. I think we need to recognize that our biases can be unconscious, Marcus said, addressing the group. It's about how we can support one another in dismantling these structures. Dr. Jenkins interjected, her tone sharp. But isn't it risky to label our colleagues as biased? Shouldn't we focus on individual merit instead? Marcus felt a swell of frustration, but maintained his composure. It's not about labeling anyone, Dr. Jenkins. It's about acknowledging the systems that shape our perceptions. We can't ignore the impact of race on opportunities within our institution. The conversation became more animated, with some faculty members expressing support while others hesitated, caught in an uncomfortable silence. Marcus felt both empowered and isolated, a lone voice challenging the status quo. As the workshop concluded, he received mixed feedback. Some faculty members approached him with gratitude, sharing their own stories of bias and exclusion. Others, particularly from the more conservative faction, left hurriedly, their expressions unreadable. Later that week, the news of Marcus's workshop made its way to the administration. He received an email inviting him to present his findings at a university-wide conference, an opportunity that both thrilled and terrified him. This was the platform he had hoped for, a chance to advocate for systemic change on a larger scale. But with this chance came the realization that the backlash could be severe. Sitting at his desk, he prepared his notes for the conference, each word a step towards justice, tinged with the anxiety of what lay ahead. As he typed, he thought of his colleagues, the supportive voices that had emerged during the workshop, and those who had retreated into silence. He was determined to carry their stories with him, knowing the fight for equity was far from over. As the days dwindled down to the university-wide conference, the atmosphere around Dr. Marcus Thompson grew tense. He could feel the weight of his colleagues' scrutiny pressing down on him like a thick fog. Whispers filled the hallways, and furtive glances were exchanged during faculty meetings. Marcus was no stranger to the subtle biases that had shadowed his career, but this time felt different, more pronounced, more hostile. It was as if his decision to confront the systemic racism within the institution had awakened a sleeping giant, one that was now eyeing him with suspicion and disdain. In the quiet of his office, Marcus stared at the screen, reviewing his presentation one last time. The data was compelling, irrefutable evidence of the disparities faced by minority students and faculty. He had poured his heart into this work, determined to shed light on the uncomfortable truths that lurked beneath the surface. Yet, an undercurrent of anxiety gnawed at him. The anonymous threats had started to appear in his inbox just days after he announced his intention to speak at the conference, each message dripping with malice and intimidation. "Dr. Thompson, you should reconsider your presentation," one anonymous email warned. "It would be wise to keep your head down and not stir the pot." The words stung, but Marcus refused to let fear dictate his course. He recalled Jamal's voice echoing in his mind. "Speak your truth, Marcus. It's the only way to make change." He clenched his fists, channeling that resolve as he prepared to face the audience. The day of the conference arrived, and the auditorium buzzed with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Faculty members gathered, some eager to hear Marcus's insights, while others sat with crossed arms and skeptical expressions. Dr. Sarah Jenkins was there, her presence a constant thorn in his side. Marcus took a deep breath, grounding himself before stepping onto the stage. As he began his presentation, the atmosphere shifted. The room fell silent, captivated by the power of his words. "Today, we are not just discussing statistics. We are confronting a reality that affects real lives. Students and professors who have been marginalized and overlooked within this institution," he proclaimed, his voice steady and resolute. He shared poignant anecdotes alongside his data, illustrating the impact of systemic racism not just as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged glances filled with uncertainty. But as Marcus's conviction illuminated the room, he noticed a few faculty members leaning forward, engaged, their expressions softening. "Dr. Thompson," one supportive colleague interjected after the presentation, "your research is vital. It's about time we address these issues openly." However, Marcus could feel Dr. Jenkins's icy glare from the back of the room. After the applause faded, she stood up, her voice dripping with skepticism. "While I appreciate your passion, Marcus, we must also consider the broader implications of your claims. Are we truly prepared to label our university as a racist institution?" Her question hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus felt a rush of frustration. "Dr. Jenkins, I'm not here to label anyone. I'm here to advocate for change. Ignoring the problem simply perpetuates it," he replied, his voice steady but firm. The audience murmured, sensing the tension. Some looked at Marcus with admiration, while others remained entrenched in their discomfort. As the conference drew to a close, Marcus felt a mix of triumph and uncertainty. He had spoken his truth, but at what cost? Later that evening, after the adrenaline had faded, Marcus received a call that would change everything. He answered, his heart racing, only to hear the voice of a colleague from a national academic organization. "Marcus, I have some exciting news. You've been nominated for a prestigious national award due to your groundbreaking research." A wave of disbelief washed over him. This recognition felt like a beacon of hope amidst the storm of adversity he faced. Yet, just as quickly as the excitement surged, a familiar sense of dread crept back in. The scrutiny would only intensify, and he could already envision the whispers growing louder, the discontent of those threatened by his success. "Thank you," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm honored." The conversation concluded, but as he hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that this new accolade would place an even larger target on his back. He looked out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the campus. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his accomplishments, the research that had garnered attention, the presentation that had stirred conversation. Yet, the shadows of doubt lingered, reminding him of the challenges that lay ahead. As the day of the awards ceremony approached, Dr. Marcus Thompson felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He meticulously adjusted his bow tie in the mirror, his heart racing at the thought of standing before a crowd of esteemed colleagues, ready to accept an honor that symbolized years of hard work and dedication. Yet, just as he was about to step out of his apartment, an urgent message popped up on his phone. It was a notification from Jamal, warning him about some troubling news circulating among the faculty. "Marcus, you need to be careful. I heard Dr. Jenkins is spreading rumors about your research methods. People are starting to question your nomination." Jamal's text read, punctuated with a worried emoji. Marcus's stomach sank. Dr. Sarah Jenkins had always been an antagonist in his professional life, her condescending remarks and dismissive attitudes toward his work echoing in his mind. He quickly texted back, "I'll handle it. Thanks for the heads up." Determined not to let the whispers undermine his moment, Marcus took a deep breath and steeled himself for what lay ahead. He was proud of his research on educational disparities, a study that had not only gained national attention, but had also opened up critical conversations about systemic bias in academia. Yet, the insidious nature of the environment he worked in threatened to overshadow his achievements. Later that evening, as he and Jamal prepared to leave for the ceremony, they sat on the couch, the tension palpable. Marcus looked at Jamal, vulnerability breaking through his practiced facade. "What if they don't take me seriously? What if Jenkins' rumors stick? I've worked so hard for this," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Jamal leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Marcus, listen to me. No one can take away the truth of your work. You've dedicated your life to this research, and it matters. You matter. Just be yourself up there. Speak your truth." Marcus nodded, feeling a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "You're right. I can't let her get into my head. I have to focus on what's important." As they arrived at the Grand Hall, the atmosphere was electric, filled with the chatter of accomplished scholars and the clinking of glasses. Marcus felt a wave of anxiety wash over him as he entered the room. He scanned the crowd for familiar faces, spotting Dr. Jenkins across the room, her expression a mixture of disdain and calculated indifference. It was a reminder of the battle he was fighting, not just for recognition, but for respect and equality in an institution that had often pushed him aside. When it was finally time for his acceptance speech, Marcus took a deep breath as he approached the podium. The crowd settled down, and he could feel the weight of their gazes on him. He cleared his throat, steadying himself. "Thank you all for this incredible honor. I stand before you not just as a recipient of this award, but as a voice for those who have faced similar challenges in academia. My research highlights the disparities that exist within our educational systems, disparities that are often rooted in biases that go unchecked." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "It has come to my attention that there are those among us who would rather silence the truth than confront it. I've faced challenges that I believe stem from a deep-seated discomfort with discussing race and bias in our institutions. But it is imperative that we engage in these conversations, for only then can we hope to create a truly inclusive environment for all students and faculty." As he spoke, he noticed Dr. Jenkins's expression twist into a scornful frown, the tension between them palpable even from a distance. But he pressed on, fueled by the support of the audience who leaned in, captivated by his honesty. Let us not forget the power of education. It is meant to uplift, to challenge the status quo, and to foster a community where every voice is heard. My hope is that we can move past the barriers that divide us and work together towards a future where merit is recognized over prejudice. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing in his ears like a balm to his spirit. As he stepped away from the podium, Marcus felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had spoken his truth, and for that he felt empowered. As the night wore on, filled with celebration and camaraderie, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger journey. He had taken a stand, and though the battle was far from over, he knew he had allies. People who believed in the importance of equity, who stood ready to fight alongside him against the biases that had long plagued their institution. The aftermath of Marcus's acceptance speech rippled through the university like a sudden storm, shaking the very foundations of an institution that had long turned a blind eye to its own biases. In the days following the ceremony, the administration convened emergency meetings, grappling with the revelations of systemic discrimination that Marcus had so courageously laid bare. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and whispers of an investigation began to circulate among the faculty. "Can you believe what he said up there?" a professor remarked during a coffee break, his voice low but heavy with disbelief. "He actually called us out." Another colleague, a mid-career woman who had always been sympathetic to Marcus, replied, "He was right. We need to look at our hiring practices. This has been brewing for too long." Meanwhile, in the office of the university's provost, Dr. Elaine Roberts, a sense of urgency permeated the air. She sat at her desk, piles of reports and emails strewn about, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We have to take this seriously," she said, addressing her senior staff. "The last thing we need is a public backlash. We need to show that we're committed to change." Days passed, and as the investigation unfolded, whispers transformed into a cacophony of speculation. Marcus, who was used to navigating the undercurrents of academia, found himself at the center of a storm he had not anticipated. He received a call from a reporter interested in his perspective on the inquiry. "Dr. Thompson, how do you feel about the investigation into the university's hiring practices?" the reporter asked, his voice crackling through the phone. "I believe it's a necessary step," Marcus responded, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But it's only the beginning. The real challenge will be ensuring that these changes are implemented effectively and not just as a public relations move." As the investigation progressed, evidence began to surface, and the narrative of an institution grappling with its flaws transformed into one of accountability. Documents were unearthed, revealing that Dr. Jenkins had indeed played a significant role in undermining Marcus's candidacy for committee positions. Emails exchanged between her and other faculty members painted a picture of a calculated effort to maintain the status quo. "Can you believe this? Jenkins was manipulating the committee decisions all along," whispered a faculty member to a colleague in the hallway. Disbelief etched across their face. The university administration, faced with undeniable proof of Jenkins's misconduct, wasted no time in taking action. In a decisive move, they suspended her, launching a comprehensive review of their policies on diversity and inclusion. Dr. Jenkins has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation, Dr. Roberts announced at a faculty meeting, her tone firm yet regretful. "We must ensure that our processes are transparent and fair for all faculty members, particularly those from underrepresented groups." The room buzzed with a mixture of shock and relief. Marcus sat in the back, feeling a swell of vindication. His perseverance had not only exposed the biases he faced, but it had also catalyzed a movement for change within the university. A few weeks later, the dust began to settle. The university reached out to Marcus with an offer he had never imagined would come his way, a prominent position on the very committee he had been excluded from, along with a grant for further research into educational equity. When he received the call, Marcus felt a rush of emotions. "This is a significant opportunity, but it's also a responsibility," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I want to make sure that this committee reflects the diversity of our student body and addresses the systemic issues we've been ignoring for too long." The day of the announcement arrived, and Marcus stood before a gathering of colleagues, many of whom had once doubted him. A sense of empowerment coursed through him as he took the podium. "Today marks not just a new chapter for my career, but a pivotal moment for our institution," he began, his voice resonating throughout the hall. "This is about more than just me. It's about creating an environment where every voice is heard and valued." As he spoke, he felt the weight of his journey lift, replaced by a sense of hope and purpose. He had faced adversity, but he had not faced it alone. His experiences had sparked a necessary dialogue that would lead to meaningful change. In the quiet moments that followed his speech, as applause echoed around him, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The fight for justice was far from over, but he knew that he had made a significant impact. With renewed resolve, he stepped into his new role, ready to advocate for the inclusivity and respect that every scholar deserved.